If you have youngins in preschool through 5th grade, we have junior church available. That's what all the kids just walked out for. So if you're unaware of that and want to send them back or down, you're welcome to do so. They head down there during this time usually. So 1 Kings chapter 19 is where we're going to be today. If you have a Bible with you, I would love for you to get that out and turn with me there. 1 Kings chapter 19. As we get rolling, quick question I would like to ask you, if it shows up on the screen, is, there we go. What would you do if you only had 24 hours to live? Now, songs have been written about this very question, from country songs to rap songs, and as the famous rapper Mace said, he said he'd get a fresh baldy, make a few calls, shop at the mall, shoot a little ball, which sounds very specific, right? Very good day lined out there. He's got a haircut, phone time, lunch at the food court, and then b-ball with his homies. Great day if you're going to live one day, right? Now, the country singer, Sammy Kershaw, he answered a little differently. His was a little bit more vague and poetic. He said, I think I'll turn this car around and head back home. Take nothing for granted. In a second, it can all be gone. Now, when it comes to this question, what would you do if you only had 24 hours to live? Answers are pretty mixed, but they basically fall into one of two categories. Either one, you'd be with the people who matter most. Raise your hand if that's what you would do if you only had 24 hours. Or B, some would go hog wild and live it up. Let me see my people. Where are you at? All right, there you go. Whew. I don't know exactly where you fall in this, but Elijah, he wasn't in either category. He did something entirely different when he was faced with this question of what am I going to do since I only have 24 hours to live? Now, before we get into what he did, I want to kind of quickly review his story. We've been studying Elijah's life over the past 5 weeks, and he enters the scene, and the nation of Israel was a disaster, right? Idol worship was running rampant in the country, and the reason primarily was because their king, Ahab, had married this woman named Jezebel, and she was the princess of Sidon, and together those two just pushed all God worship out of the way and elevated Baal worship, and so it was everywhere. And so God called Elijah to confront the issue, and so he shows up to King Ahab, and he issues a warning that there was going to be a devastating drought sweep the land, and it was going to last for years. After that, God sent Elijah into hiding, and he went to Kerith Brook, where, as you recall, God fed Elijah miraculously by sending ravens who would bring him food when he needed it. After that Kerith Brook dried up and there was no more water where Elijah was, God moved Elijah again to another village called Zarephath, where we see that Elijah spent time living at this random widow's house who had a son who died, and Elijah rose him from the dead. It is a tremendous story, right? Now, after that, we see that God calls Elijah again to go confront Ahab about all the idol worship. And they set up this duel between Elijah, the solo lone prophet of God, versus 450 prophets of Baal. And they had this showdown on Mount Carmel, and if you remember from 2 weeks ago, Elijah wins, and after he wins, he kills all the prophets of Baal. And then he prays. That's where we were at last week. He prayed and prayed and prayed. What was he praying for? Do you remember? Rain, right? And after he prays numerous times for rain, he sees a tiny little cloud in the distance, a speck of hope, and he doesn't give up. He keeps praying until the rain just unleashes and floods the land. So this is where we're at now. And you would imagine that after all of these crazy events that Elijah has had in his life, and all these successes and all this victory, that he would be like on cloud nine, that life would be rolling. He would feel confident, victorious, right? Nothing could possibly stand in his way. Then we get to 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 1, and we read this. When Ahab got home, so this is after the rain, Ahab got home, he told Jezebel, his wife, everything Elijah had done, including the way he had killed all the prophets of Baal. Now, we haven't talked a whole lot about Jezebel in this series so far. All I've said is that she's known as Jezebel the hag from, you remember, right? It rhymes with her name. Anyway, this terrible, disgusting, ugly woman, I don't know about facial features or anything, but she was nasty inside. Anyway, she is notorious because of several reasons. Number one, her goal was to wipe out God worship, and so to achieve that, she killed numerous of God's prophets. Not only that, but she funded the worship of Baal. With government money, with tax money, she paid prophets to spread this nasty idol worship all over the land. And so she hears what Elijah has done to these prophets she's been paying, and look what she says in verse 2. Jezebel sent this message to Elijah. May the gods strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you just as you killed them. And so Elijah is given notice that he has 24 hours to live. What's he going to do with that? Now, before we get to what he does with that, I want to consider Jezebel's threat for just a minute. With all the power of the kingdom at her disposal, why do you think she threatened Elijah? Why didn't she just cut to the chase and kill him immediately? Why put it off a day? My thoughts are twofold. Number one, I think perhaps Jezebel didn't have any hitmen available to do the job. After all, Elijah has just killed a lot of her yes men, and so she has no one left to order around. Or number two, I think perhaps Jezebel was bluffing. Perhaps she reacted and she issues this threat that is perhaps an idle one. We don't really know why she chooses to issue this warning and give him a notice of 24 hours. And the truth is, a lot of us don't know why we do the things we do either. There are so many times in life when we react to the situation around us without being able to think through it clearly. And that includes even Elijah. When he was faced with 24 hours to live, he didn't do any of the standard things. He didn't go home to see his folks. He didn't throw a kegger and invite all his rowdy friends. He didn't even do anything spiritual, like reflect and pray. Instead, verse 3 tells us how Elijah handles the situation. It says, Elijah was afraid and fled for his life. Elijah ran away. And that makes me ask, why now? After everything that Elijah has been through, countless times, reasons for him to be afraid, he's now running away from this one-woman threat. Why does his confidence disappear so easily? Why does he tuck his tail and run when things get a little dicey? It makes me ask one big question today. How can someone so strong become so weak? Now look at the second half of verse 3. It says, if I can find it, after he says that he was afraid and fled for his life, it says he went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. Now, this trip Elijah takes is longer than what meets the eye here. This trip from where he was in Jezreel to Beersheba was about 95 miles. And honestly, Elijah couldn't have gotten any further away from home and still be considered in his country. Beersheba was like their southern border. It was like the wall. It was like the Rio Grande, you know what I'm saying? Like, he goes as far south as he possibly can while still staying within the country. And then it says he runs even further. After getting to the southern border, it tells us that Elijah says goodbye to his servant, and then he keeps running even further. We don't know why, but I think it's because Elijah was slipping into a really dark spot. Personal question that you don't have to answer out loud with even a show of hands. Do you ever find yourself in a really dark spot? Not exactly sure why. Don't know how you got there. Don't know what set it off. Well, Elijah is a man just like you and I. We experience these random situations and oftentimes don't know how to handle them. And I hope that today, as we engage with Elijah's story and see what he did, that we walk away with maybe some helpful advice of what to do next time we find ourselves in another dark spot. Look at verse 4. It says, he went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. Now, I want to approach that verse from two sides. There's a physical side of this and a mental side of this. The physical side is we see Elijah holding up under this solitary tree. Now, when you and I think of solitary trees out in the wilderness, we probably think of something like this, right? A giant oak tree, super full, big leaves, lots of limbs, lots of shade, maybe even teeming with squirrels that you could kill and eat if you got hungry, right? This is the picture of a big solitary tree for us. But that is not the picture that we get of Elijah. Elijah, it says, sits under a broom tree or a juniper tree. These trees were not big. At their full maturity, they might reach 12 feet tall, but typically a full mature juniper tree is somewhere between 4 and 10 feet tall. They don't have giant oak leaves. They have little spindly leaves that dry up really quickly. The branches aren't super long or thick. They are very thin and spindly. And so I want you to realize that this physical state that Elijah finds himself in is depressing in and of itself. There's not a lot of shade there. There's no food source. He's miserable. But then there's the mental side. And the truth is, it's even worse. Elijah asks God if he can die. In fact, he says something like expressing the idea that if it were up to him, he'd be dead. But he's expressing this idea that he realizes that all life comes from God. Your life, my life, all life is up to God. When it begins, when it ends. And so Elijah is not saying that he wants to end his life. He's basically saying, God, I'd like to die, but I know that I can't make that decision because my life is at your disposal. And then at the end of verse 4, I want you to see what he says. He says, I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. What does Elijah mean by that? I think to get a grasp on this, we could look at a couple other leaders that we read about in the Bible. One is Moses. Raise your hand if you've heard of Moses. Good. All right. Moses was a leader of the Israelite people way back in the Old Testament. He was the guy that God chose to deliver the law, or the Old Testament law, to the people. And at one point, Moses found himself so annoyed and so tired of the Israelites complaining and whining about everything that one day, this is what he says to God. He says, if this is how you intend to treat me, just go ahead and kill me. Do me a favor and spare me this misery. God, just get rid of me. There's another guy I'd like you to consider, and that is Jonah. Last summer, we went through a series about Jonah. You may recall that God called Jonah to go to preach in a city called Nineveh, a city full of rebellious people. Jonah didn't want to do that, and so he chose instead to run away. He boarded a ship, found himself in a storm, was thrown overboard, and then you know what happened, right? He's swallowed by a giant fish. The giant fish then spits him out on dry land, and then God tells him again, I spared your life, buddy, and I still want you to go to Nineveh. And then Jonah admits why he ran away in the first place. It wasn't because he was afraid of the Ninevites. He didn't want to go to Nineveh because he knew that if he preached the grace of God to those people and they responded and they repented, that God would forgive them. And at the end of that, Jonah says this, Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live. Just get rid of me. Another person I want you to consider is Paul, the apostle. Paul faced lots of troubles in life. And here's one of the things that he said in the middle or after one of those experiences. He says, we do not want you to be uninformed about the troubles we experienced We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself. And look at that last line. He said, we had the sentence of death within ourselves. In other words, I would have rather been dead. Here's why I mentioned these three men, Moses, Jonah, and Paul. They all went through a similar experience that we find Elijah going through in 1 Kings chapter 19. And what that leads me to believe and understand is that even the strongest people of faith are susceptible to fear and anxiety and depression and all kinds of other mental health struggles. Whatever Elijah was going through, I think it reminds us that we are frail people too. Because if you've been in one of those dark seasons and you're not exactly sure how to get out of it, Elijah's breakdown for some reason makes you feel better, doesn't it? Knowing that someone else of great faith, a tremendous leader, experienced some of the same exact things that you do. Now, on the flip side, we look at Elijah and still wonder, what happened to him? What happened to the Elijah that we've been studying, who just days ago was so strong and brave and confident and never overwhelmed? And now he sees himself and his life as a complete waste. What caused Elijah to nearly give up? And then what I really want to answer with the rest of our time today is, what can we do differently the next time we find ourselves spiraling out of control? I'm going to give you 5 things that I think we can pull directly from Elijah's story today. And the first is this: next time you find yourself spiraling out of control, consider the source of the threat. You see, Elijah's downward spiral started because one woman, Jezebel, issued a threat. Now, whether or not she was bluffing isn't the point. The point is looking at how Elijah responded. You see, numerous times before this, when Elijah was faced with a difficult situation, we see that he went to God. But this time, he didn't. He just caved and ran. And so the next time you find yourself in a dark spot, spiraling out of control, I want you to consider the source of the threat that you feel. How did it start? And I'd say there are a couple different ways it begins for some of us. Criticism. Raise your hand if you've ever been criticized. Isn't it fun? Love it, don't you? Public criticism can go a long way to send you into a downward spiral, can't it? What about social media? You ever get on social media and think, why did I just waste that last 90 minutes of my life and I feel way worse than I used to? Yeah, you been there? Of course you have. How about a text message from a friend who had your so-called best interest in mind when they sent you what they sent you? That'll set you off, won't it? Or sometimes it's just your own thoughts, and they run rampant, and it's a threat even to yourself. You can sometimes be a threat to yourself. The truth is, if we allow anything or anybody but God to teach us how to think and what to believe, then we will find ourselves in the same situation that Elijah found himself in, ready to quit, ready to throw in the towel, ready to just be done. And so lesson from this is, clear thinking begins and ends with God. You have to know what God says about you. And the way you discover that is by reading his written word. That will help you fine-tune what is true and what isn't, even about yourself. And it'll help you consider the source, whether or not it's accurate or not. Second thing that you can do the next time you find yourself in a downward spiral is inspired from verse 4. Will you look there again with me? We already read it, but I want to go back to it. The very first line of verse 4, if there's anything that should jump off the pages today, it's this. It says, when Elijah was struggling, he went on what? Alone. He went on alone. And so the next time you find yourself in a dark spot, accept the company of someone you trust. Elijah didn't do this. Elijah decided to send his servant, his only friend that he had had with him for a while, to send him away, and then Elijah carried on by himself. I don't know about you, but I can speak for myself that when I'm struggling, one of the first things that I want to do is just crawl in a hole and be by myself. Anybody know what I'm talking about? And it's especially true, I think, within the church. As a preacher, I probably can't count the number of times that I have witnessed someone start slipping, go into a spiral, discover their life is a mess, and the very next move they make is to disassociate themselves from anyone that is healthy for them. Instead of drawing closer to our brothers and sisters, we run away from them. We avoid them. We stop answering phone calls. We stop returning text messages. We stop going to small group. We stop going to Sunday school. We stop going to church on Sunday mornings. Why? Because we're trying to avoid the people that might pull us out of the time that we're in. Elijah was just like us. He ran away, isolated himself, just like Lucas was talking about in his men's ministry announcement this morning. Isolation is the breeding ground of depression. And so it is the exact opposite thing that you should do when you find yourself spiraling out of control. Don't push away the people who you trust. Draw closer to them. Third thing that you can do next time that you're spiraling out of control or in one of those dark moments is anticipate the aftermath of success. You see, Elijah had just come out of a really great victory. If you recall, he defeated the prophets of Baal. He cut them out of the land for good. He should have been riding this spiritual high. He prays, it rains. He should have felt revived and renewed, but instead, we see that his moment of success led to a strange opposite effect for him. It made him vulnerable. And the truth is, some of our best moments in life are often followed by our most fragile moments. Why do you think it works that way? If you've ever had a great moment, specifically a great moment where you've connected with God and things seem to be rolling well and you feel at peace, isn't it strange how within the next couple days or weeks the bottom falls out of that and you feel absolutely miserable? Why does life work that way? I have to question it, and I think that maybe it's inherent. Maybe it's built in. Maybe God designed us that way on purpose to keep us humble. You see, when God has given us some sort of spiritual victory, what we are often inclined to do is feel pretty self-supporting. We feel pretty independent. And God over and over again wants us to be reminded that we are dependent on Him solely. Look what 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8 says. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Satan works to expose your weaknesses. And after a victory or success, specifically with the Lord, Satan would love nothing more than to just ruin it. And so how do you stay alert for that? You have to anticipate it. I'm not saying that we should avoid being successful or having victories, but what I'm saying is that when we do have them, we have to anticipate that something is about to drop, and we need to cling to God rather than feel super independent about our own success. Elijah, the fourth thing that we can learn from him is that he ignored some really good advice that most of us share with people when they're struggling, and that is, say it with me, take care of yourself, right? Take care of yourself. Now, Elijah had been living on the edge for years. And I want you to see in verse 5 that he is finally hit bottom here. This is what it says. Elijah lay down and slept under the broom tree. Isn't it amazing how a nap can heal some of life's worst problems? Can I get an amen? Who needs a good nap? Some of you are doing that right now, all right? Snap out of it, right? So Elijah, it says he lays down and sleeps under this broom tree. I want to remind you that just before this, Elijah had been just hitting on all cylinders, all kinds of successful events in his life. And then he's threatened by Jezebel, and he runs 95 miles away. And the Bible kind of presents this idea here that he hadn't eaten and maybe hadn't even had much to drink for his marathon, followed by another marathon, followed by another marathon, and then a little bit more. Right? Elijah just keeps running, and he is physically exhausted. And when you couple physical exhaustion with mental fatigue, you're going to have something develop in you that you don't want. It is no wonder that mental health struggles are at an all-time high for many reasons. But one of the greatest, I think, is that we're tired. When people ask you how you are, how many of you regularly answer tired? If that is your answer, something's not right in your life. I'm just going to be honest and bold enough to say something needs to change. Something has to give. There is an ancient Greek proverb that says, "You will break the bow if you keep it always bent." Sounds very Yoda-like almost, doesn't it? You are not superhuman. Will you say, "I am not superhuman" with me? 1, 2, 3. I am not superhuman. Let's say it again like you mean it. I am not superhuman. None of us are. And no matter how high of an achiever you are, no matter how successful or victorious you are on a regular basis, there will be an end. Your bow will break if you keep it always bent. Look at verse 7. Then the angel, we didn't read all the other verses 5 and 6. Let's do that. So Elijah lay down and slept under the broom tree, but as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, "Get up and eat." So he looked around, and there beside his head was some bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. There's that idea. Take care of yourself. Now look at verse 7. It says, "Then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, 'Get up and eat some more, or the journey ahead will be too much for you.'" Do you notice that his physical needs are like the main priority in this moment? In fact, God addressed his physical needs before he addressed his mental ones, and before he even addressed his spiritual ones. You've probably heard it said that a hungry stomach has no ears. You may have also heard before that it's hard to see or hear God with an empty stomach. That's what's going on here. God cared for Elijah's physical needs, and God cares for your needs. But so many times we just ignore them and act like, "I'm man enough, I'm woman enough, I can pull on my big boy pants and I can do this one more day." Until the bow breaks, right? There's a fifth lesson we can learn from Elijah in this passage, and that is we have to challenge the standard that we've set for ourselves. I want to be honest with you this morning. I use ChatGPT for this point, okay? And the reason is because my original point was a little hateful. It said, "Get over yourself," all right? But I'm not sure that's really helpful for a sermon like this. So I asked ChatGPT to make it nicer, and this is what it came up with. But I do want to continue to use my own point, all right? We have to sometimes get over ourselves. And what I mean by that is not just get over it, all right? People throw that advice around like it's actually going to work. But if that advice actually works, then all of us would just do it immediately, right? We would just get over it. But it doesn't work that way. And so what I mean by get over yourself is that a lot of mental health struggles, including anxiety and depression and fear of failure, a lot of those happen not because we think too little of ourselves, but because we think about ourselves too much. And so a surefire way to overcome thoughts like that are to do something for someone else. It takes the focus off yourself and how you're hurting and struggling, and it puts the focus on someone else, which is what Jesus did also. That's what his whole life was about, was putting the focus on others. Now, I want you to look back at verse 4 towards the end of it. We already read it, but I want to look at it again. When Elijah asks God to take his life, he follows that up by saying, "For I am no better than my ancestors who have already died." Question: who told Elijah that he had to be better than his ancestors? Nobody. God didn't tell him that. Elijah told himself that. It was a standard that Elijah had created in his own mind. And so, advice, don't expect too much from yourself, because God is the standard. Not anyone else, not your own ideals, not your own expectations. It's God. Now this is important. I want you to remember how God responded to Elijah. He gave him time to rest. He gave him food to re-nourish himself with, right? I want you to notice what is not a part of God's response. God did not lecture him. God did not shame him. God did not guilt him. God did not give him a pep talk. God did not give him a swift kick in the rear end. God simply said, I'll provide for you. I'll give you rest. I'll give you food. I want you to sleep. I want you to eat. What happened? Verse 8 says, so Elijah got up and ate and drank, and the food gave him enough strength to travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. Have you heard of Mount Sinai before? It's that same mountain on which God met Moses to give him the Old Testament law. There God met Moses. And I think the reason God sent Elijah there was so that he could meet him too. The next time you're spiraling, you're in a dark spot, you're struggling mentally, even if that's right now, I hope you see that God still meets you there. He's not surprised by your struggle. He's not offended by it. He's not disappointed by it. God never created you to sustain yourself or to fix your own problems or to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. God created you to be fully dependent on him. And that is true whether you only have 24 hours to live or it just feels like it. The next time you're spiraling out of control, I hope you remember Elijah's story. A man of great faith, bold faith, did tremendous things, and yet he was still susceptible to the same junk that you and I are. And when he found himself there, as low as he could get, the Bible simply presents the idea that God met him there and he provided. I trust that God will do the same for you and the same for me. Will you pray with me? Father in heaven, we thank you so much that you meet us right where we're at. We thank you for giving us opportunities to rest and to be nourished. And God, I pray that we won't ignore those. I pray that we won't think, I can grind it out one more day, but instead to be humble enough to admit that we are dependent on you, that we are frail, and that many times we're on the verge of one of these downward spirals. I pray today that this message convicts us, challenges us, and comforts us. And God, we thank you so much for being such a good God. We praise you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.